Before the voyages of Captain Kirk, the Starship Enterprise had already carved her path among the stars. Designed for long-duration exploration and patrol, the Constitution class was the workhorse of Starfleet with at least a dozen ships in service. Yet none would become as legendary as the Enterprise herself. Captain Robert April oversaw her construction and commanded her first 5-year mission. His first officer, Christopher Pike, then took the center seat, guiding the ship through 2 more 5-year journeys before passing command to Captain James T. Kirk. Well, what's up, Plastic Addicts? Welcome to Jason's Space Dock, where sci-fi kits come to life, skills are sharpened, and every mistake is a lesson. This video is going to be a little bit different than my usual builds. On the surface, it's about refreshing and refitting my Premier Edition of the Polar Light 1350 original USS Enterprise. But the decision to clean it up didn't happen in a vacuum. There's a story behind it. Understanding where I started and what I learned along the way sets the stage for why this refresh is so meaningful, and it gives you a peek at how these models evolve over time. The Enterprise was designed by art director Matt Jeffries, with one clear directive from Gene Roddenberry: no rockets, no fins, no fire. The ship had to look like the future. After months of sketches and mock-ups, the final design was approved in August 1964. The Howard Anderson Company handled effects for the cage and subcontracted Richard Dayton Jr. By late December 1964, the work was complete, and the model was delivered to Anderson Company for filming. With the pilot in limbo, the Enterprise was quietly placed into storage, while NBC decided whether Star Trek had a future. Here's a quick comparison of what I've done on the right and what needs to be done on the left. Everything is smoothed out here to give that perfectly closed up hull that the original 11-foot model had. I used high build primer, the scratch filler primer by Duplicolor. Even if you think you got it smooth, any imperfections will come out, so you're going to have to wet sand that primer afterwards, so keep that as consideration. Now, this is my first pass before actually sealing all the windows. Originally, I was going to leave in some of the plastic windows and fill other gaps where they were lighted versus not lighted. That was kind of the original step before I decided to go into First Pilot. Here's the first example of detail that needs to be removed. Those ribs have to come out, and there is that little insert piece there. This is flipped so it's flat, so that when you remove all those pieces, you get that nice smooth finish. Same thing with the shuttle bay. Sanded off all the etched detail to give a smooth door. And of course, I had to use the shuttle bay itself because I lost the insert piece for when you don't use the shuttle bay. Here's a little note: if you do use the shuttle bay, it is a poor fit. A lot of people talk about this. There is a raised ridge right here on the internal plastic. You see, it's not much. Here is where it's been removed with the barrel sander. Another contrast again where the ridge is there. When you sand that down and remove it, then the shuttle bay will fit in, but it's still really tight. This was one of the big things when they released this model. The way the pylons are designed, when properly glued in, as you can see, I'm using the old tube glue because I need working time. When everything is glued together, there will be no movement on these over time. So you don't have to worry about nacelle sag with this model. It's a couple things. You've got these long pegs on either end where it goes into the hull and the nacelles, and of course these cross ribs. So once you glue it together, put your two halves together, clamp it down, because you want that nice strong bond. You want that glue to do its thing. I didn't get the detailing right in this part, and we'll talk about it in the next portion of the video. What I did get right is these little nubs have to come off the inner chillers. Absolutely, they have to go for First Pilot. And these little nubby tuckers here as well. The rectangular piece was on the back of the 3-foot. The back of the 11-foot was smooth. I'm doing the 11-foot, so that's the rear caps that I'm going with. And these 3 little raised bars around the lower sensor dome also have to go. The original kit came with etched grid lines. I sanded them all off manually. I didn't fill and sand. I sanded them right down. It took forever, but it was absolutely worth it. Of course, later they released it without the grid lines because it was wrong. Bit of a time jump to the painted model ready for decals. I actually used floss to mark this line because once you take everything off, there's no reference. And I wanted to make sure all the decals went in the appropriate place and straight. So this was kind of my solution for that, is create reference points. And by and large, from here on out, it's mostly, if not all, decals. And I'm going to talk about this a lot over this entire video. But if you're familiar with my work and how anyone does decals on, remove excess moisture with paper towel and then use Solvaset to get it locked in. Now, this is how I tackled the windows. I actually made a template out of parchment paper. I used the base of the neck and the base of the pylon as a marking point, so I could lock it in the same point. Pencil on the hull where the windows go. Now, all these window decals had to be cut out one at a time, so it's a lot of cutting. But once you have them marked on the hull, it's easy peasy. And then same procedure. Paper towel to remove excess water, excess moisture, and then Solvaset to lock it down onto the hull. And through the magic of editing, let's do another time jump where you can see I've got almost all the decals on. Same procedure, I used the floss to create a center line on the nacelles so I could get these pennant decals in the right spot. I went with more of a crimson red. The Bussard caps did have a gloss finish in the first pilot, and the deflector was also a bit more shiny. And here's some focus on the window decals. This is the set that HJ Modelworks created, that we worked together on. And we got good placement on those. But I do want to show the neck. We only touched on it earlier. I used the upper portion of the neck as a guide for the template, but also I'm still using the floss here because I need a straight up and down line just to make sure we get all these guys aligned so they look straight when they're finished and not all off or angled or cockeyed. Now, these window decals are fantastic. There's a ton of extras. The only thing that's time consuming is they all have to be cut off. You're going to spend a lot of time with an X-Acto knife, so make sure you got a good sharp blade. But that's the end result. All this great window detail. So the saucer took a bit more work because there's multiple marking decals and windows, and I need to get different locations. So I basically made the cross left to right, front to back, and then crisscrossed all the other sides, and that allowed me to get everything where it needed to be. I actually found the lower saucer a little bit easier than the upper saucer because once for the bottom it's basically left to right, front to back, because there's not too many marking decals. But I needed those cross pieces for the windows on the saucer rim, and of course the upper saucer, getting these guys all lined up and getting that name and registry centered. But with a little bit of practice and a lot of water to allow me to make adjustments as necessary, it worked out extremely well. And this is always my favorite part, getting that registry on, just knowing you're in the home stretch is so satisfying, and the whole look starts to come together. Now, though I did use the wrong decal on this, it should have been the notched 7. Oops. I was and still am extremely happy with this first build. At the time, I was just trying all kinds of new things, experimenting to see what worked and what didn't. When I found out the first pilot version of the Enterprise wasn't lit, all the windows and details were simply painted on, that gave me the idea for my 1350 build. I wanted to do something different, something hardly anyone else was doing, seal up all the hull openings, and recreate the look of the original studio model. As I mentioned, I actually teamed up with Jerry at HDA Modelworks to develop the first pilot decal set, complete with window decals. Now, he'd already worked with Trekworks to develop a second pilot set, so adapting that wasn't too complicated. Now, the video you just saw in my first build was a pretty quick and broad overview. With the next one, my commission build in 2022, I was able to take my content creation much deeper. Well, good news for me, by the time 2022 rolled around, Round 2 had made changes to the 350 refit, and now the saucer does not have grid lines I have to sand off. So that was pretty sweet. Otherwise, here I'm just going over the parts. Some things I've already installed. Oh, pardon me, that's a lie. There are grid lines left on the saucer edge, but since that seam needs to be filled and sanded, not a big deal. I've already done a few things prior to recording this video. There's a number of components installed, sub-assemblies done, windows put in, but those are just taking the bulk of the space because it's all going to be filled in. Here, the reason I've got some circled is those are the ones that did not exist on the first pilot. They were added later for second pilot and or production version. A little look at the template, how I mark my windows once everything's sealed up. Very handy. Glad I kept it. Same thing for the pylons and the neck. I didn't really get into it in the build I did in 2015 in the footage, but what I'm doing to completely fill the windows, because I don't want an edge seam. I want it perfectly smooth. So I've used the kit-supplied windows to fill the gaps, and then I'm using crazy glue and baking soda to take care of anything else, any unevenness in the surface, but ultimately there's always that little seam around the edge of where you put the kit-supplied windows in. And yeah, there's a wonderful reaction between these two components. Drop the crazy glue in, add the baking soda, and it becomes a rock-hard substance. But it has been extremely handy for not just filling these windows, but I've used it in other applications. It can be an extremely strong gap filler. I've used it on the refit. Because of that 4-part secondary hull, or even where the pylons go, it makes such a strong bond, and it is a sandable surface when you're done. And here's a look at the other hull half where I've already done the filling and some additional additional spot putty, because this surface is still going to be uneven, but spot putty as a finisher is just the name of the game. And as you can see behind this piece, I have already done that on the neck and one of the pylons, and there's a little bit of putty just taking care of that seam on the nacelle. I also took care of the area on either side of the deflector where the piece goes in. It's either flat or ribbed depending on the version. Took off the raised ribs on above and below it, and then filled and smoothed it out. So this piece is going to get a wet sand before getting primer, just to smooth things out as much as possible. And then there'll be some more work after that. I had to do a bit more filling on the nacelles than I had expected. They were pretty good when I did it from the 2012 version, but by 2022 it's starting to show its age. And there's a few dips where the alignment pegs are that need attention. On this one, I've already sanded off the rectangular detail on the back of the nacelle, because once again, doing 11-foot studio version, not 3-foot version. And the Dremel with the barrel sander I found was kind of the best way to go about it. Previously I scraped it off with a knife, which was risky, and then hand sand it. So this speeds up the process and you get a better result. And the neck has been completed both sides. The front and rear seam, where the two halves go together, is very clean. Really, I just sanded it. All these windows are filled, and I have applied the scratch filler primer, the high build primer, because, as I said previously, any imperfection will still show through, but the benefit to the really thick primer is you can wet sand that out and get a beautiful finish. Same with the pylons. You can see right here, there's a little bit of detail sticking out. That's actually going to need some additional fill. Same with the hull halves together, excuse me. This area, you want to make sure you get a lot of glue on. I did find that over time it was starting to separate on mine. And here is the insert I lost the first time, so I had to use the shuttle bay in order to use the shuttle bay doors. This is just a quick insert, so you can pop the shuttle bay doors on, and you're done, and you don't have to do any internal sanding. It just fits properly. And I didn't install that piece the first time, so on mine it was just a dome with nothing below it. This will kind of finish that detail off. And the saucer came out pretty clean. I had to fill in recessed detail and cover the 4 lights on the outer quarters of the saucer, but same thing. Everything went on well. Filling the gaps went well. The joint between the bridge and the saucer is good. It's really just a wet sand to clean it up, but I will go over the whole thing with a light and look for any defects, because we want this to be as perfect as it can be. Same with the lower saucer, very clean. I did fill in the recesses for the triangles and the there was a raised piece at the base of them. But everything went well. Those 3 windows on either quarter, they're supposed to be recessed. They're not set that way. I actually put a spacer in to get the right effect. And before we paint, here is the defect check stage. So I went over this with a light to look for any defect. So this is kind of the last stage of puttying. Anywhere where there's an unevenness or a trench or it's just not perfectly smooth, I went back over. As you can see, the nacelles need a fair bit of work because of those 4 squares that are on each pylon, which I filled them so they're perfectly smooth. They may have existed as flat pieces, but I don't have any visual proof of that, so I opted to maintain the Enterprise was smooth, smooth, smooth. And just like my very first build, I had to add reference points because everything has been removed from the hull. And this is basically the procedure. It was easy enough to find center on here. So just like before, I used floss, honestly just because it's cheap and readily available, and anchored on either end to establish a center line. So in this case, just right down the middle of the bottom of the lower hull. I've got the post hole and that square thingamajigger below the deflector. And I was able to center on the shuttle bay. Now, once that's all taped into place, I had to take another step so I could actually slide the decal underneath, because I found the first time I did it, I hadn't added a spacer, so I had to fight it a little bit. And these cuticle sticks that I actually used for burnishing masking tape worked out perfectly, just to give me a little bit of space between the hull and my alignment line. And then it was just a matter of installing the decals. I just cut them off the sheet and placed them because they're already spaced properly. Once I was happy with the placement, just removed the cuticle sticks and the floss line so I could get that decal locked in and solvasetted down. Now the marking underneath the fantail, I did it freehand just because I had enough reference between the shape of the rear shuttle bay underhang and the position of the other decals. It's been a couple years, and for the life of me, I cannot remember why I opted to do it this way versus the neck not attached to the hull. I suspect it has something to do with trying to make sure the windows were aligned as cleanly as possible, because the hull doesn't have a teardrop shape, but it tapers down toward the shuttle bay, and if you don't establish a proper straight line, they'll look all cockeyed. I feel like it wouldn't have mattered since I contoured the template to the neck itself. Well, for whatever reason, it worked out. Template on, mark the windows, trim 30 windows off the sheet, and then apply them like any other decal. Wet them, place them, dry them, solvaset them. Rinse, repeat. It's going to be the name of the game for this, for pretty much the rest of this build. And there's the result. Cleanly installed windows on both sides of the neck. Best thing to remember, trust the template. So there are a couple of drawbacks to aftermarket decals. The biggest is that you have to cut all your own decals off the sheet. The other is that they're very soft and flexible, so they do tend to warp or fold underneath each other, so you need to keep that in mind and be very careful, or, if those things happen, take your time, because they are resilient, so you can really, really work them before there's a problem or an unrecoverable failure. But most times they will go on without a problem. All things considered, I'd say that the nacelles are the hardest ones to do, mostly because of lack of reference, but also the very tight curvature of the nacelle cylinders. So trying to get that straight can be a bit of a challenge. But like anything with models, decals in particular, be patient, take your time, and you will get that alignment right. And if you replicate the way I'm doing this, once you get them lined up, just get them dried up and solvaset it in place, and they're going to look great. So this is the area where I made biggest mistakes or lack of accuracy on my first build. As it turns out, there was no detail on these radiators. I had taken off those nipples on the end, but the raised the kind of the raised detail along the length of both components I had left on. And it's not super complicated to address. This I had done before, removed these end pieces. I wish I could remember their name. I'm just going to call them radiators on the back of the nacelles. And then I use a knife to scrape off as much of this raised detail as possible, because it's very, very thin. So it's easy to do that. And then sand off the rest. And of course, wet sand to smooth the whole thing out. It doesn't need any filling. Same on the inner radiators. Remove these little raised bobbles. Use the nippers to get most of the material off. The knife to get any high spots down. And then that way I can sand and wet sand to smooth this area out. I also removed all the running lights from it. I had left that on originally and smoothed out the Bussard housing. I actually put the kit supplied molded light in and then just nipped off the top. That way I was able to get the receiver hole filled very easily, and then it was really just sanding and wet sanding to smooth it out. And then, of course, these rings that delineate the area between the Bussard housing and the nacelle proper. I actually like that these come in multi-piece. It's really, really good for crisp detail, especially out of molded plastic, or injection molded plastic, excuse me. And it's just a matter of gluing the three rings together. Once it's assembled, it only goes on one way, so there's really not much chance that you can run into problems with it. These are I don't even know what these are called, the three panels on the underside of the nacelle, likely just for detailing. They might have an in-universe function that, once again, I can't recall. But same thing, they're designed to... Everything is designed to fit. That's what's so great about this model. And yes, I'm hard on round 2 sometimes for their choices, but this 350 scale original series Enterprise, I've got no complaints. It is a fantastic build. I just have nothing but good things to say about it. I've masked where the Bussard collector goes into the housing so that when I paint it, it won't affect the fit. And I've opted to go for a darker, more reddish red and leave it flat or eggshell semi-gloss because it is not shiny like it was in the first pilot. The rear spine strip is pretty easy because there's lots of reference points, although it does have a tendency to want to, I'll call it wander, so it's kind of easier to lock one end down. At this point, you've seen me do enough decals on this ship that we can kind of start glossing over a few things. This is just a very quick overview of placing windows on the hull. There's a bunch of them, and it's just a matter of following the template and making minor adjustments till you get it right. The different colors I used in the deflector. I used a bronze for the housing, and the deflector itself, just in a semi-gloss finish. Here's a quick look at the finished secondary hull. You can also see the pylons and supplemental parts in screen, but everything's put together nice and clean. Love the colors. Very happy with this. For the saucer, we're going to do this in 2 parts, upper saucer and lower saucer, starting with the lower saucer. As you can see, some decals already on, but I'm going to go ahead and start putting these triangle decals on, which I believe are doors for landing gear. In universe, never shown on screen. That's not a conversation for this video. So get both those guys put on, same as always, get them on the hull, adjust them, and then get rid of the excess moisture and use Solvaset to get them to lock down. And we are going to come back to Solvaset in a little bit because there's an issue to talk about. But moving on, the warning strips for the warp engines, same procedure. And much like the secondary hull, let's drop some windows on. In this case, as you can see, I just placed them and then did the final adjustment before locking them all down as one full set. Now this is what I want to talk about. I'm using Microsol, not to lock down the decal, but to unlock it. I need to lift it off the hull. And I found out that you can basically use this product to reactivate, we'll call it reactivate the decal. But you got to be careful because it also is a solvent. But the issue is I put these in the wrong spot. I put them on the quarters facing the windows, but they're much closer to center. And just using the 1000 scale as an example to show you where they're supposed to go. And the one of them I did place in the right spot. You can see it's just a few degrees over from where the other one is. So while I'm discussing this, the salva set is doing its thing and loosening the decal. And then that way I can start to pull it up and potentially recycle it if I don't damage it. Luckily I have another set of decals, or had another set of decals, just in case. But I was able to pull this one up cleanly and reposition it. So lucky break. And a look at the finished lower saucer. You can actually see in this image the clear coat is still drying. And the upper saucer is basically a speed run through the decals. Usually I do the registry last. It's kind of like the last thing. Like I said in another video, it's that, okay, we're in the end. There's light at the end of the tunnel. We're almost done. But this time I opted to position the name and registry first, and then do all the decals on the hull afterwards. This one's always a challenge because it's so big. And I've found, if your clear coat, your gloss coat, so you don't get silvering when you put these on, if it's not perfectly dry, they do want to stick a little bit. So you gotta fight them, and you can stretch them, which causes problems. So give your gloss coat lots of time to dry before moving on to the decals. So these are just all the markings for the various hatches. I believe the yellow one is for a telescope, obviously an astronomical telescope. They're in space. At least I've seen that on various blueprints, in universe, because I don't want anyone to call me out for thinking any of this is real. And the rest of this is just marking decals. This whole little bit on the front and sides of the bridge. And there's this forward one. There's actually two decals. This warning strip with the yellow, and then this guy is as well. Some of these weren't on at the delivery. I think they were added because once you got my assumption is once they got studio lights on, they realized there was a certain amount of blandness or maybe scale issues. So these are nice touches that were added after delivery. And there's the almost finished upper saucer. Still got to put the dome on the bridge. When I was commissioned to build another first pilot Enterprise, the 11-foot studio model at the Smithsonian had just undergone a major restoration. A team of experts was brought in, and in the process, they uncovered new information about the construction and detailing changes made during the run of Star Trek. In recreating the production version, the restoration team was able to sort out specific details of the first and second pilot versions. That research helped me tremendously. I was able to make my client's Enterprise even more accurate than the one I had built for myself. As it happened, my client lived in Virginia, so we were able to meet at the Smithsonian. I got to hand him his finished Enterprise right in front of the original 11-foot model. I'm going to do this section a little bit differently because it's kind of the same as things you've seen before. I'm going to do an overview here of my disassembled first pilot Enterprise and the areas that need work, like the pylons. There's some cracking where those panels go, where they meet the hull. And I need to install that clear piece under the dome. The neck is really just refinishing. Not much to say about that. Same thing with the nacelles. They are pretty clean. We're basically going to be looking for any seam issues and cleaning those up. The Bussard collectors, really they're just getting a different color to kind of brighten them up a little bit. The deflector dish does need some repair. It came from the factory like that, so I got to clean that up somehow. The deflector housing. This is really just getting a different color. Filling these in because I'm putting no running lights on it. The smooth end caps will need refinishing. They're a little rough. The shuttle bay is actually okay, and I'm going to fill this little hole between the exhaust ports on the impulse engines. Not much to say about the inner warp panels or the bolt covers. All these radiators for the nacelles, all that detail's coming off. So here I'm just popping off the running lights I did leave on. I'm hoping to recycle the ones that are still there. There's only 3. One of the lower ones went missing sometime in the past. And this is just covering all the areas that need to get filled. The receiver holes on the Bussard housings. Just cleaning up the rear caps on the nacelles to smooth those out and get rid of any imperfections. Cover that hole. And this seam needs a lot of work. It looked good in the past, I guess. Good enough to go, but you can see all the areas around where the nacelles meet the body and the seam, and especially behind the deflector where the rod goes, need a lot of cleanup. And yeah, just sanding off the detail on that. And I've sped this up because the saucer seam need a lot of work, so just kind of opening up areas, re-gluing and putting it back together. And here is my collection of Enterprise pieces. So these are all sanded, smoothed, ready for primer, paint, decals, and reinstall. Really, this is, like I said, this is just a refinish. Did not go down to the bare plastic. Just all I've done is filling where it needs to be done, detail removal where it needs to be done, but it's just a general sand and prep for primer. And I'm very happy with how the pieces look. Really, this is just tuning up things I could have done better the first time and correcting details to make this as accurate to the 11-foot studio miniature as possible. As I mentioned, I'm going to change up my presentation for the last segment of this video because it's all review, and there's some other things that I would like to express. At this stage, it's less about the process and more about what this Enterprise represents. That realization started when I was invited to the Toronto Prop Expo. Deciding what to bring made me take a hard look at my first pilot Enterprise, and I realized it was showing its age. But as I got into it, I realized the work wasn't just about fixing a display piece, it was about reconnecting with the reasons I built in the first place. For me, this hobby became more than plastic and paint back in 2012. After we lost our daughter, model building was a form of therapy, a way to stay focused and creative through the hardest of times. And right then, something remarkable happened. Boyd, better known as Trekworks, created the sci-fi model action form. That space, and Boyd himself, gave me and countless others a community. He wasn't just sharing techniques, he was building bridges, helping us feel connected, inspired, and part of something larger. That's always what the Enterprise stood for too. Gene Roddenberry saw the ship as a symbol of Earth itself, one vessel carrying many people, all connected, all reliant on each other. When I think back to those early days in the community, I see that same spirit. We were individuals scattered around the world, but through modeling and through people like Boyd, we became a crew. Some of those friends are still with me today, and others we've sadly lost. But their influence lives on. Every time I sit at the bench, every time I take on a project like this, their voices are still there, encouraging, teaching, reminding me why this hobby matters. So yes, this refresh gave me a sharper, more accurate Enterprise for my collection. But more than that, it gave me a chance to honor the friendships, the mentors, and the shared passion that brought me here. That's what this ship represents to me. Not just the first starship, but the connections and creativity that keep us all moving forward together. Model building is all about the journey. Every kit comes with its own challenges, but each one is an opportunity to grow your skills and create something truly one of a kind. So keep building, enjoy the process, and remember, it's not about perfection, it's about pushing your craft forward, one build at a time. If this video inspired your own modeling, or added value to your hobby, supporting the channel is the best way to keep these builds, tips, and stories coming. Whether you join my Patreon, become a channel member, or buy me a coffee, your support helps me continue sharing in-depth builds, behind-the-scenes insights, and the joy of bringing iconic sci-fi models to life for our community.